While I was having a video call, suddenly, there was a loud thud at the back of my head. Surprised by the sudden impact, I turned around to find my husband's mother, Helen, standing there, with a smirk and an unpleasant laugh. "Chatting away on the computer, huh? You must have a lot of free time. You slave should hurry up and clean," she said, still wearing that smirk. Apparently, she had thrown a dirty, wet rag at me. I was so shocked that I couldn't find the words. Since we started living together, I've been tossed around by Helen, who, despite me working full-time, insists on dumping all the household chores on me. Being burdened with all the household chores is tough enough, and to be subjected to such harassment is just too much. I felt a mix of frustration and sadness, almost on the verge of tears. There I was, feeling overwhelmed, and Helen was gleefully laughing at my distress. The situation took an unexpected turn when a voice came through the video call, asking, "Do you have any final words?" The moment that voice was heard, Helen turned pale, started trembling, and looked like she was about to collapse. "My name is Phoebe. I'm a 27-year-old office worker who got married to my husband Damien, 2 years my senior, 6 months ago. Since getting married, I've been living with Helen at her house. The reason for us moving into her home was the passing of Damien's father 6 months ago. Just before we got married, he passed away in an accident, leaving Helen living alone in a large house. Concerned that his elderly mother would be living alone from then on, my husband, who was my fiancé at the time, proposed the idea of moving into Helen's house. My mom has never lived alone until now. It must be tough to suddenly be alone at this age. I worry that something might happen to her. So, I was wondering if we can move to her place. Is that okay?" My husband, being the only son, might naturally worry about his parent, I thought. With that in mind, I agreed to live with Helen. However, I couldn't understand why my husband was so worried, because his mother, in her mid-50s, was full of energy. Since we started living together, she has been pushing household chores onto me, going out, and having fun every day, despite my full-time job. "Make sure to clean properly today. Don't forget to trim the grass in the garden, and finish it by evening. Of course, prepare dinner too. Well then, I'm off." "Wait, hold on, Helen. I have work now, so that's impossible." "Oh, she's already gone." As expected, with the limited time before my work, I couldn't finish both cleaning and trimming the grass. I decided to finish them after work. However, right after I returned home from work, Helen came back as well. She noticed that the household chores weren't all done, and she started making snide comments. "It's not finished yet? Honestly, you're so inefficient. What have you been doing all day? Oh, don't give me that excuse of having a job." Even though she doesn't do a single household chore herself, she is arrogantly lecturing me. It is honestly infuriating, but I knew that responding would only prolong the conversation. I stayed silent, bowed my head, and listened as she proudly hurls one sarcastic remark after another. "Well, I don't expect much from you. Anyway, hurry up and make dinner. Just finish it quickly, because Damien will be back soon. It's unthinkable not to have dinner ready to welcome your tired husband back from work." Having had her say, she eventually left there with a satisfied look. I started cooking, despite feeling irritated at the thought that her prolonged conversation was causing a delay in preparing dinner. Being manipulated and criticized by her every day, I began to regret accepting Damien's idea just a few months after we started living with Helen. My husband, who is too busy to notice the strained relationship between Helen and I, works for the company managed by his grandmother. This company was originally established and expanded by his grandfather, and after his passing, it's been run by his grandmother. Due to her getting older, they had been discussing to have Damien's father succeed her for several years. However, just as this was happening, he passed away. Since Helen, who had never worked in the company, couldn't take over, Damien, being the grandson, became the successor candidate instead. Damien is busier than regular employees, as he juggles normal duties and succession training every day. Until he thoroughly learns the business and can replace his grandmother, she is managing the company as the president. Having served as the president for many years, Jean has a very honest character. Disliking dishonesty, she often adopts a strict attitude towards herself and others. Perhaps because Helen was strictly disciplined by her when she first married into the family, she seems to have an aversion to Jean. Just mentioning her makes Helen show a displeased expression. On the other hand, I got along well with her from the beginning of my marriage. Probably because I have similar tastes and perspectives as her. Fortunately, our relationship wasn't as strained as the typical mother-in-law and daughter-in-law dynamic. Without realizing it, Jean and I became close, to the point where I would go to her place alone on weekends to hang out. Helen seems displeased with our relationship, and since she noticed that I am close to Jean, she frequently makes bad remarks to me.
Phoebe, it seems like you're getting along well with Jean. She is going out of her way to spend time with you just to be kind, even though she is very busy. Why don't you realize that you might be bothering her? How about showing a bit of consideration?
And perhaps, to prevent me from going to Jean's place, Helen has increasingly started to exploit me even more than before.
I'm home. Hey, is dinner still not ready? It seems like the cleaning isn't done either. There's a limit to being inefficient, you know?
Helen, upon returning home, immediately looked down at me with a disdainful expression.
I'm sorry. I just finished work and got home, so I don't want to hear any excuses. Just hurry up and make it.
As someone who works full-time, with occasional overtime, it's impossible for me to flawlessly handle all the household chores. I wish Helen would compromise, at least on days when I have overtime, allowing me to buy pre-made dishes from the stores. However, she insists I don't want to eat
anything unhealthy. All the cooking should be homemade
and doesn't yield. Feeling increasingly tired of her unreasonable demands, I decided to consult with Damien when she was not around.
Your mother doesn't listen to me. Can't you talk to her, Damien? It's impossible for me, working full-time, to handle all the household chores perfectly on my own. She needs to help.
However, even when I made this plea, he didn't lend a sympathetic ear.
Sorry, but I'm busy with work and tired. If you have complaints, can you take them elsewhere?
I suspect that he finds it bothersome when I speak negatively about Helen, and that's likely why he responded in that way. Damien is in training to succeed at Jean's company, seeming to be entrusted with various tasks. He literally works from morning till night, and working on weekends is not uncommon. Reluctant to cause any trouble for him, I couldn't bring myself to discuss Helen's behavior with him any further. Amidst these uncomfortable days, one day, I received a call from Jean on a day off.
I have something I don't understand with computer operations. Phoebe, can you teach me? Do you have time now? Now is perfect. I just finished the morning chores. I'll help you.
As I had just finished my chores, I readily accepted her request. I switched to a video call with her and explained, while remotely operating her computer.
When you click this button, this screen will appear. So, if you click OK here.
While I was explaining and operating the screen, suddenly there was a loud thud. at the back of my head.
Huh.
Shocked by the sudden incident, I swiftly turned around. There stood Helen, smirking with an unpleasant laugh. I then noticed a disgusting smell coming from below and, looking down, saw a dirty wet rag lying on the floor. Unable to believe it, I touched the wet sensation on the back of my head, only to find my hand wet, with a similarly bad smell. It seems Helen had thrown a dirty wet rag at me.
Chatting away on the computer, huh? You must have a lot of free time. You slaves should hurry up and clean.
I was so shocked by the turn of events that I couldn't find the words. Being called a slave by her and having a dirty rag thrown at me, including the usual harassment from her, I couldn't comprehend anything. Why did I have to endure such treatment? What could I have possibly done? Such thoughts were swirling in my head, and I became momentarily stunned, my mind going blank. Helen, satisfied with my stunned state, continued to smirk and look down on me, without saying anything. A discomforting silence filled the house. Breaking that silence, Jean spoke up.
Do you have any final words?
Her voice came through the computer screen, on the other side during the video call. The moment she heard that voice, Helen seemed to realize that my call partner was Jean. Blood drained from her face, and she turned pale.
What? That voice, could it be Jean? Were you talking to her?
Apparently, even though it was a video call, the remote control screen didn't display Jean's face, so Helen hadn't realized who my call partner was. From the other side of the screen, Jean's cold voice echoed.
I didn't just hear your voice. I don't know how it looks from your end, but I can see what's happening on your side. I saw you throwing a rag at Phoebe perfectly.
Realizing that her actions had been observed by Jean, Helen opened and closed her mouth in shock with a pale face. Ignoring her demeanor, Jean seemed to have ended the remote control screen mode, and her face appeared on the computer screen. Her face was stern, almost like a stone-cold poker face, glaring sharply at Helen.
Speaking very rudely to Phoebe, right in front of me, and even doing such terrible things. What are you thinking? Explain yourself. No, it's not like that. This is, well, I was just trying to point out that she was neglecting her household chores.
In response to Jean's question, she nervously stammered, while sweating profusely. Jean looked at her with a cold gaze.
What nonsense! When I called, she said she had finished her morning chores. Do you think she was lying? Even if she were, what about the rag you threw at her? Is that part of your discipline? And how do you explain calling her a slave? Do you really consider her a slave? Enough with the nonsense. Well, that's,
Unable to provide a coherent answer to Jean's relentless questioning, Helen shrank back, avoiding eye contact. Either amazed or exasperated by her actions, Jean let out a big sigh.
Well, enough. It seems I need to retrain you once more. I'll be there shortly, so wait right there. Do you understand what will happen if you try to escape?
With those words, Jean ended the video call. Standing in front of the computer, Helen, with a despairing and pale face, was left speechless. Her demeanor mirrored the stunned expression I had when I was enduring harassment from her just a while ago. About 30 minutes later, Jean and Damien rushed to our house. Perhaps Damien heard the situation briefly from Jean on their way. His expression was stern.
Now then, let's hear once again what exactly you intended with this incident.
In the end, Helen remained frozen, in the same state she was in when the call ended, but when questioned by Jean, she started trembling uncontrollably.
Jean, it's really not what you think. I haven't been bullying Phoebe or anything. I just advised her to stop playing around and take care of the household chores properly.
At this point, even I, who had been patient until now, reached my limit with her continued excuses. As if the frustration that had built up until now had exploded, I shouted at Helen,
"Stop speaking nonsense! It's absolutely ridiculous to dump all the household chores on me while you wander around as you please. Plus, I have a full-time job. I'm not idly playing around. I can't possibly meet the standards of housekeeping you expect. How do you think someone who works from morning to night, 5 days a week, can clean every nook and cranny of the house without fail every day? It's impossible. Even just cleaning is challenging, but you insist on making a homemade, 3-course meal for every meal, do daily gardening and watering, and never skip laundry and ironing. It's unreasonable."
Expressing my frustration to Helen, I also appealed to Jean and Damien, detailing the unreasonable demands and actions I had endured from her.
"What? Mom, were you really imposing such impossible tasks on her? Even though you're not working and have plenty of time?"
Upon hearing my story, Damien confronted Helen with an incredulous expression. Under the gaze of a shocked Damien and a disapproving Jean, Helen shrank and cowered. When it became apparent that she wasn't going to answer, Damien turned to me and said,
"It seems I've made a serious mistake all this time. Phoebe, I am very sorry for not listening to your story properly. I had no idea you were going through such hardships. I mistakenly assumed that Mom was taking care of the housework. I should have realized it sooner and either warned Mom or handled the situation in some way. I'm sorry."
Apologizing deeply, his face turned pale. He continued, "You don't want to have anything
to do with Mom anymore, do you? Let's dissolve our living arrangement with her and live together, just the two of us."
This unexpected proposal from my husband surprised me more than it made me happy.
Is it okay?"
I asked, half wondering if I misheard or imagined his suggestion. Confirming cautiously, Damien strongly nodded and said,
"Of course."
He was serious about handling this problem between Helen and me. Feeling supported, I couldn't help but feel relieved and teary-eyed with happiness. However, it seemed that Helen, who had been observing the exchange between Damien and me, was displeased with this turn of events and suddenly became enraged.
"What's this all about? Both Damien and Phoebe, what nonsense are you two talking about? What's good about it? It's natural for a younger lady to handle household chores perfectly. It's a given for you to serve your husband's mother. Moving out of this house is out of the question."
Helen insisted that she had done nothing wrong and blamed everything on me, claiming that I, as her son's wife, failed to manage the household properly. Her stubbornness in asserting her righteousness through this sudden rage was incredibly selfish. Despite my intention to retort against Helen's outrageous claims, before I could say anything, Jean intervened.
"You're the one talking nonsense. If you believe that your son's wife should serve you, then you should take the lead in serving our family."
With this stern rebuke from Jean, Helen, who had been assertive just moments ago, changed her demeanor abruptly. She trembled and cowered in fear.
"That's... Damien, help me. I love living with you too. It's comfortable. Besides, your grandmother's house has housekeepers, so there's nothing I can do to help. Please tell your grandma that I want to continue living with you."
Helen desperately clung to Damien, but he gazed at her with a cold expression.
"Sure, living a carefree life without doing anything for the house must have been comfortable. But because of you, Phoebe is going through a lot. I don't know how great being a mother of the house is supposed to be, But why can't you consider helping out?
Faced with Damien's rational response, Helen bit her lip, looking frustrated, and lowered her gaze. Watching this, Jean intervened decisively and cut off Helen.
Really? Clinging to your child and begging for help, aren't you ashamed? Fine, if you want to live with someone so badly, I'll live with you. Damien, arrange for a moving company. It might cost a bit, but find a company that can handle it as soon as possible.
Efficiently giving instructions to Damien, Jean left Helen flustered.
No, not that. Please spare me from that, Jean.
Despite her desperate resistance to living with Jean, the driver who had been waiting in the corner of the room dragged her forcefully to the car. In this state, she was forcibly taken to Jean's house.
No.
Helen's scream echoed, like a dying cry, resonating for a long time. A few days later, the moving company, arranged by Damien, transported all of Helen's belongings to Jean's house. Helen officially started living with Jean. It seemed that Helen was being rigorously trained by Jean in various household chores and miscellaneous tasks for the company.
You've only done that much? It's slow. At this rate, it'll never finish. Hurry up. Once you're done with that, come home and start preparing dinner. It's too much.
Having various tasks hammered into her by Jean, Helen was living every day, worn out and exhausted. By the way, she has a tendency to overspend and seems to have used a significant portion of her husband's inheritance. Therefore, no matter how much she dislikes Jean's house, she cannot find a new home to move. Only once, she tried to escape from Jean's house and sneak into the house where Damien and I continue to live. Since Damien had immediately changed the locks on the front door of the house, after kicking out Helen, her key couldn't unlock the door. Realizing this, she banged on the door and shouted, "Damien, help me. Let me in. Please, hide me." Although she was very noisy making this appeal at the front door, both Damien and I ignored her cries. Eventually, Jean arrived and took her away. Since then, we haven't seen her. As a couple, we started living freely in the spacious home after Helen left, and the absence of stress allowed us to live more comfortably. Whether it was the relief from stress or other factors, we eventually were blessed with a child. While eagerly anticipating the arrival of our baby, I am currently living a very peaceful life.